By now, most of us have heard the term B Corporation or benefit corporation, but understanding what it means and why a company might want to become one may be less clear. Ryan Honeyman is author of the B Corp Handbook, How You Can Use Business as a Force for Good, and consults to organizations all over the world on how to make that journey successful. In this episode of Moments of Truth, I speak with Ryan about why companies might consider raising their game and meeting the rigorous standards of what it means to be a benefit corporation and a force for good. Take a listen. So Ryan, I want to start by getting a little bit personal. When I spent a lot of time studying your work and your life and reading about things you wrote, and it's real clear as you look at the body of work in your career, you're driven by some deep convictions, some very personal senses of justice and fairness and a greater good, and that those values seem very sacrosanct to you. So give me a glimpse into your story. Tell me what experiences shaped such convictions and values for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so I go back to usually how I started off, which is in wanting to reform the prison system. So I originally did psychology and criminal justice and really was looking at, how do we solve this, problem of like mass incarceration, the psychological effects of imprisonment. And I think that for me, it was, both aligned with those values, but also extremely difficult because you're almost dealing with sort of the downstream effects of a lot of the way that our country is set up. It's sort of like, there's a lot of things happen before someone gets to prison or, and so one day my brother had studied environmental studies in college and he had some books on his shelf. And I started reading about, going green. I think like Al Gore's book was, something about the inconvenient truth was probably, I think that was a movie, but there was also a book he wrote and there was a few classic books like Natural Capitalism. And I suddenly was like, wow, so I could take this sort of interest in, building a more beautiful world and apply it to, helping businesses and organizations improve their social and environmental performance, to sort of look at the more upstream effects and like create more positive outcomes for society. Yeah, and I think that all happened a very short period of time. Sort of like getting really, burned out because I was working directly with emotionally troubled youth at like a residential care facility, and so sort of having that experience, getting really burned out, and then like reading about what could be, I think it sort of made that shift in me, and that's how I sort of have been on this path around using business for good.
Awesome. So, one of the things that was fascinating in your book, the B Corp Handbook, was how tangible you make the journey of wanting to become B Corp certified, which of course is rigorous and requires sustained commitment and effort. So tell me, when you think about, who'd want to undergo the process of being certified? I mean, it's not easy, and nor should it be. How's it benefited the people who've done it? And for those who may not understand the difference between B Corp certified and a B Corporation as a registered, tax status, maybe explain the difference so they can understand, because some folks may not quite see it, and the benefits of doing it.
Yeah. So the B Corp movement started with this idea of how do we harness the power of the private sector to promote social good? Because you've already have nonprofits and government, in theory, sort of working on social benefit, and you had private business, the old Milton Friedman model of like the social purpose of a company is to maximize profits. That was sort of the founding like ethos. So in the founders of B Lab, this nonprofit behind the B Corp movement, really had some negative experiences with growing their own company and trying to sell it, and then investors wanting to maximize profits and strip out all the benefits of the company that they had founded, to reduce it to just sort of like, again, maximize shareholder value. And so they said, what if we could incentivize business to be better by two key things? And this is where the like two core components of the whole B Corp movement started out. So one is a certification that allows any company in the world, any for-profit company, to benchmark, compare, and improve their social and environmental performance, and then get a sort of third-party stamp of approval on that certification. So it's both, internal performance and also sort of like external validation that you've met these standards. The other key component that they realized was critical is that to be like certifications are great, but at the end of the day, if you still have a shareholder maximization mindset in your business, it's going to be very difficult to, when times get tough or there's a big question, to have shareholders having a lot of leverage to push your company towards not doing the more socially or environmentally beneficial thing and actually giving the windfall back to them. So they created something called the benefit corporation legal structure, which is a little bit confusing because there's like the B Corp certification and then there's the benefit corporation legal structure. And, so there's some confusion, but basically the gist is that in about 37 or 38 states in the US and in some countries around the world, like Italy and I think Colombia, have passed benefit corporation legislation. So in any of these 38 states, including Delaware and California, New York, and even South Carolina and Louisiana. So there's a lot of red states and blue states. In any of these states, you can actually go to the Secretary of State and say, I want to form a business that's not just a standard C corporation or S corporation, but actually a benefit corporation. And what that does is it allows you to consider more than just profits when making decisions. It basically bakes in that mission to your DNA. And so also companies that are in existence can also make that make that conversion. They don't have to only be startups.
What have you seen people do to embed their purpose in their daily practices and their daily habits and routines as a company and how they operate that truly makes it part of their DNA?
This is one of the reasons why I've found the B Corp to be so powerful, is because it gives you that, many of us in business are like, what gets measured, what gets accomplished, right? And so if there's a list that says like, create an environmental purchasing policy, try to purchase from suppliers that have a green or sustainable ethos. If that is a little check mark and you can get 2 points on this assessment, you're like, suddenly it's exciting. We're like, oh, I want those 2 points. And so it's sort of I feel like the B Corp assessment both is a good tool because it's comprehensive and touches all the aspects of your company, workers, community, environment, governance, customers, but also it gives you that sort of fun, a little bit of gamified angle to it, where it's like, oh, well, Patagonia scored 150 and we're also in the outdoor retail space and we're scoring 91. So what the heck is Patagonia doing that can, and so you can sort of compete on impact for the world as opposed to just like what's their quarterly revenue or so I think that's one shift, is just having the framework to do it. And I think another shift is it's one of those things where you got to have the top leadership. They don't necessarily have to be sort of like in the meetings filling out the B Corp assessment and sort of doing all the details. But I think that the top people have to be bought into this idea that we are about something bigger than just profits. Otherwise, you just have a lot of mid-level staff or lower level staff who are not going to be as effective.
So in the book, you say, you mentioned this before about Patagonia, becoming a B corporation helps protect the company's mission for the long term to benefit society. So even if you don't put the legal protection in place, although that's clearly a solidifying one, especially for founding entrepreneurs, many entrepreneurs will start companies with a real genuine desire to be benefit driven, to be purpose driven, to be stakeholder mindful. But that sustaining that long-term perspective and keeping your eye on a long-term future is awfully hard, especially for entrepreneurs. Yeah. How would you offer them advice on keeping their eyes on long-term vision? What are some practical things they can do to sustain that, a vision for something that should outlive them, beyond the generation of management that they're in now? How do you hold tight to that, especially when you're weathering a storm of economics or some product crisis or a recall or many of the things that put us back on our heels.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely more answers than just like, I think taking the B impact assessment, having a framework can really help bring people back. I would say, one nice thing about the certification is that it's every 3 years. So companies are constantly having to recertify every 3 years. So that would, help bring companies back to this. And obviously having the benefit corporation legal structure gives you that sort of, you have to do an annual report every year about the impact of your company. And so there's a sort of a constant, like, chosen, you're sort of choosing to have an imposition on you to actually report out based on that. So those are like, some of the key things that I see a lot of companies doing. But yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of value in like, there's often these professional communities like YPO and et cetera. And I know that there's now more groups who are sustainability and sort of purpose focused. So it's sort of, it's not just, or maybe it's like sort of a sort of subset of folks who are in a professional community. Like, hey, what if we also met and talked about, how are we making our business more socially and environmentally responsible? And maybe using the B impact assessment as a tool to guide that subset of groups. So that peer learning. And yeah, I think publicly stating goals, it's always like, there's a lot of research around like, if you publicly say it, you're probably going to do it.
If you were sitting in front of a leader who was curious, who had good intentions, who wanted to really had some desire to have impact in the world beyond their own self-gratification or their own wealth creation or their own shareholder convictions, but had not really tapped into that value set or hadn't really cultivated that the kind of truly global empathy, right? You'd have to feel care. And they said to you, Ryan, what do I do? How would you help them begin that inner work?
Yeah, there's a few things come up for me. Have you heard of the author Frederic Laloux, who wrote Reinventing Organization? Okay. Yeah. So part of me is wondering if the new model of business is not these sort of like leaders who are benevolently like having this internal change to like change things, but is more of a broad-based, like distributed, non-hierarchical, like I think like the older systems of companies, like you need a sort of leader who has this like personal transformation and like allows the company to do things. Whereas I'm not sure that's really that useful, or like, I'm not sure it's going to get us where we need to go if we're reliant on like, the top 500 CEOs of these large companies, so I think I'm really interested in is like, what is like distributed non-hierarchical leadership, self-management, things like more worker ownership, worker co-ops. So I think that could be a really interesting piece. I'm not sure if that CEO would be that open to me talking about that, but just as like a broader point, and maybe this is like a space to explore, I don't know if for you or others, but, sort of like, what is this next iteration of it's not reliant on a leader to decide. It's reliant on like a movement or, kind of like how Black Lives Matter and stuff is happening now. There's not a Martin Luther King driving this thing and we're like waiting for him to tell us what to do next. This is sort of like, it's moving on its own. It's self-organized. There's multiple leaders. It's not based on like age or experience. It's based on like, a lot of other factors. So I think that maybe like what's happening in sort of that activism space is like probably where businesses are going to need to be heading, where it's sort of like, there's not sort of like a gatekeeper to allow the company to do certain things. So that's a whole like aside that I was thinking about. Yeah, and I think, if I was meeting with that individual person, usually I talk to them about, B Corp or being purpose driven is only a step on the path of like where you want to go. So like, what do you want to do? Because getting B Corp certified is great, or saying you're purpose driven is great, but like, what are you trying to actually do with your life or your company? And so it'd be a little bit of the like, where do you want to be in 10 years? What do you see as the big changes? And sort of understanding that passion and motivation, and then sort of connecting it back to, okay, well, what's the easiest way to get there? Or what's the most powerful way to empower folks, or, connect that future vision you have back to this idea of being purpose driven.
Ryan, this has been fabulous. I'm grateful for your insights, for a great conversation. Thank you for your generosity and all of the good work you do in the world. And keep it up.
Thank you.
In this episode of Voices, we get to listen in on Khalil Smith's amazing conversation with Janet On, professor of psychology at William Patterson University. In Janet's conversation with Khalil, she talks about allyship, bias, speaking up for yourself, and why the spotlight effect makes us think that speaking up may be more risky than it actually is. Take a listen.
All right, so Janet, thank you for your time today. You are by far one of the most fun, smart people I know.
Stop.
You totally are, I swear. And so I'm super
Such
excited
a lie.
just to kind of hear where your head goes with all of this. But first and foremost, maybe, for the folks that are not as fortunate as I am and don't know you yet, maybe just like a 10-second intro of who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Janet On. I'm a professor of psychology at William Patterson University, where I study how to increase motivation and persistence for underrepresented folks in what we call STEM fields, science, tech, engineering, math fields. And who these underrepresented folk tend to be are women and persons of color. Mm-hmm. So that's really what I study. It's like the intersection of motivation, persistence / diversity, inclusion issues, because of course these things come up when you study people who are excluded from these fields.
Yeah, love it. All right, so the topic that I have pulled you into right now is just all about speaking up, right? Like finding your voice. And in a lot of ways, I've heard you talk about this as it relates to those same groups that you were just describing, right? People persevering through challenges and finding their voice and being authentic to themselves. So I would just love to know, like, how do you think of speaking up, whether it's through kind of the formal definition of what you think of, or just like the gut reaction of when I say speaking up or voice? How would you think of it?
I think, I could answer it in a personal way, how I would speak up, versus like a very academic way. And I think usually speaking up in terms of just, it starts with identity. When you speak up, what are you speaking up about, right? So is it because something was violated and you feel like your identity was threatened in the moment, so you have to defend it? Or do you speak up on behalf of another person? Are you an ally to another person that you see something being done and you felt someone needs to say something, right? It's a New York City kind of NYPD, see something, say something, right? And so I think it goes one of two ways. It starts with your own identity and why are you speaking up? And whom are you speaking up for? Is it yourself? Or is it on behalf of another human being? And I think in terms of research, the way I really see it is a little bit of both. You speak up for yourself, but also for another person. And that's that allyship that you're showing. And that's kind of the way I see it in my research.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about, because I, for myself, as I've been having these conversations with various folks, it's caused me to be a bit more introspective around, like, how do I speak up and why do I speak up and when do I speak up or not? And should I be speaking up as often as I am, or should I be speaking up about the right things or different things? But I'm curious, like, how comfortable is it for you? Because again, on the outside, I've invited a lot of people that I think have always seemed very comfortable speaking up and have always created that for me or created that for other people. But the more I talk to folks, sometimes I'm getting that, like, no, actually, I don't feel comfortable speaking up. I just am pretty good at it because I've found some mechanisms. Talk to me a little bit about how that hits you.
So I think I'm still in the spectrum, despite how, and you know me, I am vocal. I'm not afraid of speaking up generally, but I think I am on the spectrum of more, I am still learning. So for example, what happened at the university a year ago was I worked on some research, increasing persistence for, in chemistry majors. And so I worked with a chemistry faculty who's a white male at the university, and I'm clearly an Asian female. And we started to publish this work, and the university got hit, got a wind of it and really found it exciting. Interdisciplinary collaboration within a university, they wanted to publicize it. And so they got me and this other professor together for a photo shoot. It was pretty fancy setup. And wrote a whole article, wanted to know what project it was, how we're collaborating, blah, blah. And then the article was situated in a way where they took the picture where it looked like I was some type of glorified assistant to him, as opposed to being the primary investigator. And it was even written in a way where I'm assisting his research as opposed to it was my research that he's assisting on. And I was appalled, like, this was my reason. This is a psychological mechanism I'm testing. How could a chemistry professor test that? Like, he has no way of doing, but yet they attributed the idea and the innovation to him automatically and not to me. And in this scenario, I was about to speak up when it was happening, but in this scenario, he actually went right back to the publicist and said, you got this wrong. This is Dr. Janet On's research, not my own. I'm the one helping her. You need to put her name first in everything and make that clear and change the picture where it looks like I'm directing her. So he was standing above me, directing me on the computer, that picture. And he's like, that's not how it should be depicted. And so they changed it. So in this case, I was going to speak up, but I had a colleague do it for me. And I think in those scenarios, it really showed me, firstly, it showed me two things. Why is this happening? Number one. And then secondly, I was grateful that a colleague did that, but at the same time, why did he have to do that? Right? So I was very conflicted about the speaking up part, because I knew if I spoke up, I would have been viewed as problematic. And that's really disappointing, right? That I was hesitating to speak up because it would have backlashed on me, despite the fact that I was right. And this is my research. Why can't I take ownership, even though it's mine? So I felt conflicted, so I think in some ways I'm still learning where's the line between speaking up and being penalized for where you will be. I'm still figuring it out. And this instance showed me it was great to have a white male colleague to be my ally, but why did I need his voice to speak up on behalf of my own? So it was, I'm a little conflicted, even still thinking back on it. I'm still conflicted.
Yeah. So for those of us that are conflicted, because I know you also, you educate a lot of students, you talk to a lot of people, you work with a lot of corporations. And so even as you're kind of working through it, you are navigating other people through it. And I would imagine that there are leaders or, senior people in their organizations that are going to watch this and say, oh my gosh, I'm very much in a similar situation. I don't always know when to speak up. I don't always know what to say. I don't always, kind of pick the right moments. And yet I am looked to by other people and said like, oh, well, Khalil's going to do it or Janet's going to do it. What suggestions do you have for those people that are trying to navigate it for themselves, but also navigate other people?
Do something and fail at it rather than do nothing is my piece of advice. Do something and do it wrongly rather than staying silent. I think the biggest mistake as senior leaders, if these things happen or you watch something or it happened to you and you're afraid because something might be it's penalizing to you or you didn't do it well, like you didn't do it right? So you didn't say the right thing at the right time in the right way. And so that's better. Fumbling through it is better than staying silent. So that's what I would advise. And that's really what my research shows on struggling and persisting. That's where it starts. If you don't start with failure, you don't start anywhere. So where does persistence come from? How do we improve? How do we enhance motivation? It doesn't start by being perfect and then maintaining that. It starts with being bad at it and then learning and then improving. And that's the persistence and the motivation that continues, right? You have to start somewhere. And if that starting point is a failure, and it didn't start well, it's okay. You'll get it right the next time. You see what I mean? So you have to keep doing it. So I think people really just need to step in, whether for themselves or for another human being, And even if they didn't do it right that first time, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Keep doing it. And I think that's a culture we want to create. That even if we're not doing it right the first time, I know we'll get it right at some point. And if we have enough people doing it, and maybe enough people doing it not in the right way, but we're all trying anyway, you see? And at some point, it should lead to someplace better.
Yeah.
That's the road to persistence and motivation.
Yeah.
Failing through, fumbling through, and yet we're going to try to get this right. That's the attitude to have.
That's awesome. So my final question, and then I would let you get back to all of the incredible things that you're doing, is if you could kind of, have a wish or wave your magic wand, and all of us started doing something more or doing something less to create more of an environment of speaking up or to make it easier for people, like what would that thing be? What do you want to see more or less of?
I think if it's, I think less fear of doing it. So like I said, this fear of just starting somewhere rather than nowhere. So just dive in, start somewhere, initiate, and don't be so afraid of the consequences, right? And I even keep looking back of why didn't I just say something that I'm the lead primary investigator of this project? Why couldn't I just say that? Because I was afraid of the, backlash. But who cares? I would hope to see less fear and more what my colleague did too, joining in.
Yeah.
The fact that he kind of shot off an email before I could even respond emotionally, the fact that he was just right on it. We need more of that.
Yes.
We need more of that where people are watching each other's backs out, for each other and with each other. That was so powerful for me. But again, questioning as to why did I need a white man to do that for me, right? But still, I appreciate that it happened. But we need to do that for each other.
Yeah.
More of that, less fear, and more of what he did, which was shut off an email the second he saw this was happening without even texting me, hey, Janet, heads up, this happened. Oh my God. He didn't. He just went right into the email and said, this is wrong. Please correct it.
Yep.
That's it. There was no, speaking in between. He just did it. He acted.
Yeah.
So I think more of that, less fear, more acting, caring for each other, watching out for each other's backs. Why not? We're in a place in the world in a crisis of a pandemic. We need this more than ever. Yeah. We need to watch out for each other at this point, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of background. More of this, more caring of each other and watching out for each other's backs.
Hear, hear. All right. Janet, thank you for the time. It is always amazing to connect with you. And I told
always
people before,
pleasure.
You're one of the most fun, smart people I know. And now it's just been validated.
Now the whole world knows that was a big fat lie, and they're going to be like, heard nothing useful here.
Nope, they're going to be looking up that research.
Nothing useful here.
You are the
Loved
best.
It.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Janet.
Thanks,
I will talk to you
Khalil.
very, very soon.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Assume that opposing views are legitimate. No matter how outlandish they seem, start by assuming that views you don't share are valid, simply because the person with whom you differ holds them. Learn to be curious about even views you believe are wrong. Separate the views from the person who holds them to better understand what needs they serve. Remember, they perceive your views as just as preposterous, and you as an idiot for holding them. Get past your instinct to refute and reject and be willing to learn. What opposing views do you find most infuriating? Who are your organizational nemeses? Who proffer ideas and propose projects that you vehemently disagree with? What motives have you attributed to their views that may be inaccurate? What steps could you take to build a bridge to them to better understand where they're coming from? Start with inviting them to coffee or lunch and see where things go from there. Which opposing perspectives could you do a better job of seeing as legitimate, even if you don't hold them? Which beliefs have you dismissed without considering why the person who holds them feels so strongly? Remember, understanding those views doesn't mean you agree with them. Till next time, keep leaning into your moments of truth so you can be the example of what it means to be honest.